and welcome to Lunch with the Editor. This week we have an excellent cover story on neuropsychiatry and what really ails this stream of medicine. For about 60 years we are stuck in some sort of a time warp when it comes to psychiatric drugs. Even after great innovations in treatments of other diseases like cancer and diabetes, when it comes to psychiatry, there are drugs which have been around for the last 60 years. So we did some sort of a comparative examination of the new drugs that are out in the market, and what we found out was something really shocking. That is, there are still, even now, our doctors, our psychiatrists prescribe medicines that were introduced in the market in the 1950s. So we just trying to find out how many are there from various periods of time, various decades. So the first decade, like we took 1950 to 60 as a cutoff point. So there is not a single cancer drug which was introduced in the 50s or 60s right now in the market. That is, nothing is being prescribed. Same with diabetes. But when it comes to the top 20 psychiatric drugs, 5% of them were actually introduced in the 50s and 60s. Similarly, we took the next decade, that is 61 to 70. The entire 60s. No drug is still in use which was introduced for cancer or diabetes. But again, 5% of psychiatric drugs were actually introduced in that decade. Same is the case with the 70s. And when it comes to the 80s, 20% of drugs which are in vogue for psychiatric diseases, antipsychotic drugs, they were introduced in the 80s. So if we look back from 50s to 1990, that is a 40-year period, 35% of antipsychotic drugs were actually introduced before 1990, whereas of the anti-cancer and anti-diabetes drugs, all of them were introduced after 1990, which are in vogue now, which are still being prescribed now, all of them. 25% in the 90s, 45% in the noughts, and 30% in the last 6 years. So this is a huge issue wherein we are grappling with lack of drugs, we are grappling with older drugs, older therapies, and a huge vacuum, to the extent that a great neuropsychiatrist, Professor David J. Anderson of California Institute of Technology, gave an interview to us saying that pharma companies tend to invest only where there is a high chance of success. He goes to the extent of saying that there aren't any real new molecules introduced into the market in the last 50 years. So that's what Professor Anderson has to say.
It's very scary here. I mean, fundamentally, if you look at it, the point that he's trying to make, that there has been no breakthrough. It's a trial and error method. People are just trying. It's almost beating around the bush without really knowing where you're going. Some of the things, it may work for a while, but till you know why, that is, I think, what Professor Anderson in his interview makes it very clear. That this is what is not clear at all. I mean, they've been trying to grope in the dark in a way. There have been experiments on with other kind of animals, but that does not really, you can't really replicate those, because the human mind is so complex, it's complicated, that you don't know what is sparking it off, and that is why we are hitting a brick wall.
And the saddest fact is that there's absolutely no breakthrough in treatments or therapies for Alzheimer's or any kind of dementia. And all around us, we obviously can't name names, but a couple of our friends have also fallen prey to this deadly disease, wherein you go on living after losing your mind.
True.
And so at a very, very early stage, in the 40s now.
That is what is happening. I mean, that part, because you don't know what is sparking off. That's the scary part. In the other ones which you mentioned, both in cancer, diabetes, the kind of drugs that has come out, because you are trying to identify and they are working much more. In this case, it's just a guess. You're guessing around. Why? Maybe X worked for a while, then it doesn't. It stops. So you're trying something else. And the fact that you're still using drugs which have been so old in that sense shows that there's nothing new which is coming up. The backing of the financial backing which is required in research, they're not interested in it because they know. For the last 60 odd years, as Professor Anderson once again points out, there has been no real breakthrough and they're losing heart of faith. And they're not going to put money in that. That is again a very scary part. How do you then go about this research? Where do you really move so that you can ensure that something is going to work? Because in every family you'll find, meaning not directly in your immediate family, but in the larger family, dementia, Alzheimer, these are something with your either aging parents or even, as you mentioned, even with younger people that this is happening, and it's going to be a very scary scenario.
So that is our cover package for this week. What really ails neuropsychiatry, the problems in finding newer medicines, newer treatments for really big issues staring at us in the face, particularly dementia, Alzheimer's, and then all sorts of psychotic diseases. Now, moving on, the other big issue last week, and particularly something which really was sparked off by Outlook's intervention, was the visit of Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. So, a fortnight prior to his visit, Outlook had done a cover story pointing out that Khalistan Mark II is being made in Canada, and that Canadian residents, citizens, Canadian nationals or Canadian residents or people who are staying there are directly responsible for terror activities in Punjab. Outlook had named 4 of them. When Justin Trudeau visited India, Chief Minister of Punjab, Amrinder Singh, gave him a list of 9 people who are in Canada who are directly responsible for terror activities in Punjab. So what was brushed under the carpet? Trudeau refused to answer our questions. So probably in India he was forced to answer all those questions.
What I think here he is going to go back with, is the extent of concern or displeasure with this that people have. What Outlook tried to do was red flag them, that these are the issues. And at the time, the response of the Canadian authorities was rather strange. They did not only respond to the questions they had sent earlier, but they did not come out even with a statement saying that, what has happened. So in a way, he knew perhaps before starting on this journey, 8-day long, what to expect, but he didn't really think that it was going to be that big. The India visit, despite all the, the photo ops, this, that, what went around, he goes back, and this is something which he can't hide any longer, that there is a very, very serious concern all around on this issue, and he will have to take some very urgent measures to reassure both the government and India.
And also, we would like to underline that the Canadian government, particularly the Prime Minister's office, was extremely cussed with Outlook, and in particular Chief of Bureau Pranay Sharma. They withdrew the invitation they had extended to Pranay at the very last minute on Thursday evening to exhibit their displeasure at Outlook, and also this belies the great claims of this government, the Canadian Prime Minister being a liberal politician. Pranay,
You know,
what sort of liberalism is that if you can't take criticism and fair criticism?
Rajesh, frankly, I've had experience with the Canadian officials, leaders for a very long time, and irrespective of whether they are in the Conservative or in the Liberal Party, they are really liberal people. In the sense, I mean, you can have a good argument with them. They're very friendly. They take your point, or there are areas where they don't disagree. This is something least of all, I did not expect from the Canadians. They may have disagreed with some of the points that we are making, but there were ways of engaging. I found this is so childish in a way, because the number of calls that I got from other diplomat friends, they said that we can't believe that this is how they reacted. So I think, meaning he has raised a question, he has brought a focus on himself, and being the face of liberalism, now people are going to really raise question that if you can't take a critical coverage, there are things to be probed, and some questions to be asked. Why this kind of a strong reaction? You did not, or you could not have Mr. Atwal there because of the kind of,
That is a very strange thing. Now the Canadian government is trying to blame the Indian government for giving visa to Atwal, who was convicted of attempt to murder. He's a Canadian citizen. He's part of a terror organization, and he was convicted, no less than a conviction. He was convicted of attempt to murder, and then he is part of Trudeau's entourage.
For the kind of controversy that it sparked off, and he realized the mood was not for that, so they withdrew the invitation to him. But to club Outlook with that, this is something which.
So you feel that it was a balancing act?
You mean a balancing act? What are you balancing with? Here is a man who is a convicted, guy. There are questions about it. You may not like our coverage, but there are ways of responding to it. Is this the best way that they found? I find it so strange, really, to withdraw and bring the focus. In a way, he could have, if I was at the reception, he could have just ignored me, there's so many guests there. But did he have to react to, resort to this kind of action? That is something a lot of people are asking, not only me. I was at this question.
And the other issue which is still playing out is the attack, the alleged attack against the Delhi Chief Secretary, Prakash. And so Prakash claims that he was attacked by Aam Aadmi Party MLAs in the presence of Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal last week. That is still playing out. We fully don't know which version is true. There was a medical examination, and the Chief Secretary seems to have got hurt somehow. There are concussions and swelling, etc. in his face. So, but the Aam Aadmi Party government, Aam Aadmi Party spokespeople, they insist that all these are trumped up charges, and they have filed counter cases under the SC and ST Prohibition of Atrocities Act 1989, claiming that the Chief Secretary hurled casteist abuses at a Dalit MLA. So what to believe, we still don't know. It is playing out, and it is also a strange juncture. What do you say, Pranay? In the history of, in the very, very nascent story of Aam Aadmi Party.
That's the whole point, Rajesh, because Aam Aadmi Party came into being whenever, even before they started contesting the Delhi election. There was so much of hope, expectation, people who had given up on politicians, on politics, started coming together, thought perhaps, there is reason enough to believe that things can change, they should do an extremely serious introspection. What in the last several years, I mean, it has been a downhill journey now. After getting such a massive mandate, they are now known, or they are in the focus only for wrong reasons. I think this is, you can keep blaming X or Y, but at the same time they should know that how are they losing that hope that they had so wonderfully created, why are they losing out?
So we haven't yet heard the last of that. That issue is still playing out. We'll have greater coverage of Aam Aadmi Party and the Delhi politics next issue too. That's all for today. Thanks for joining.